you can get through all of your unit tests, you still want to get some better level assurances that the app functions as desired without having to use your finger to press through and find and possibly get at activities and parts of the application that might be tough to get to quickly, because I think part of all developers' job, they want to build a feature, have that feature run with a high level of assurance that it is solid. Espresso gives you a framework and ability to do some automated functional testing with the benefit of being inside your code base. So whatever it takes to instantiate that activity, you certainly can set up in your test, run that activity as is, and then make your assertions and matches accordingly. And it gives the full framework for that. Make that go away. And because the Espresso framework, very Gradle friendly, everything comes out of Gradle, so there's a couple of built-in Gradle tasks called connected Android test that you then can elevate to your Jenkins continuous integration continuous delivery environment, and then run it on multiple physical devices. And so some of the pieces that become critical, I wanted to show you the app on a bigger screen, but I don't want to, now that it had a version installed that was keyed, it's got a different version that's trying to install part of the test, so we're going to skip that. Let me just go to the, working at this size is a bit of a challenge.
You can potentially make the resolution better.
Yeah, probably should. Couple aspects. This was, I'm just testing on a real life application. The login activity is actually a series of activities that have a set of videos running in the background. I'll show you on the physical device, but I don't know if you all can see it, but I'll try and bring it up. Yeah, and so basically has greeted with a screen that's got video, it's got a pager on it that has some live interaction, and then to go into login and log in. And so I've got some tests that sit on top of that. Don't care about the photos. And then we'll work backwards into some of the additional challenges. But it goes through the process, like I said, a lot of time consuming things trying to get on a test on physical device, but this could also be run through your Jenkins automated builds. Give that a moment. A part of this, because of timing and things, there are ways of writing matchers that says, hey, go until this activity completes. And because it is integrated in your code base, it understands what the activity is, the class is, and how to monitor it starting and finishing. Almost. So I used two custom matchers. One because the pager is a specific adaptive view pager, so it needed to know, I wanted to make sure that as I swiped, it knew it was on page 0, 1, 2, 3, and back and forth, and it could hit the edges and bounce off, as well as there it goes. And so it's just going to run some of the quick tests. One, login, and it's asserting that this login will complete the activity and move on to the next view. The login It moves into a login test that says, hey, or this is a swipe test that says I can swipe multiple times, even over swipe, and the pages will or won't change. And so that was the extent of that test, what that test looks like. Let's see if I can make all of this just a little better.
Are you gonna pause the test in the middle? If it's in the middle of something, you wanna pause it?
You certainly could keep interacting because it's live. It's doing something. You can interact at that point. You can also debug the test. Everything running is running through the environment, so you can actually set a breakpoint in the test to see what it's doing at that point and what the environment is. And because it is running your actual activity, everything is real, right? All the interaction is real, and then you're able to inject in.
So I guess the question I really wanted, can you interrupt the interaction so it'll just stop where?
What do you mean? Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, you can always. Well, mostly you start pressing on it, right? If you need to interrupt the activity, I would say that you know where it's at in that port and set a breakpoint, and then debug through the test.
So can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
It's off the subject, but what logic did you use to get that page to jump? You know, like, I know what you're doing because I had a problem like that. So,
Alright.
so when you swipe it, it'll go exactly in the right page.
Yes.
If it's in between, then it'll go to one or the other.
Right.
What logic did you use for that? I was going to use math round.
This one actually, all I'm doing is I'm using the Espresso framework to say swipe left, and it does a perfect swipe left.
It knows the edge of the page and it'll stop.
It'll do an actual swipe left gesture on your page,
Oh,
and that will cause it to react as if it got a swipe left gesture.
okay.
And at that point, it's up to you to do your matchers to say, I'm going to give it a swipe left, and then I'm going to assert that
It's
it's
on flush.
page, right? And so that's where
Okay.
a custom matcher came in.
And there had to be some logic in that, though, right? There have to be some kind of a.
Yes.
Okay.
And
what do you
we'll-
use for that?
So for instance, let's go with.
You know, it might be off topic. So.
No, it's part of what I'm going to jump
Okay.
into and talk about. There are two custom resources. One is, and I will now see if I can. That's going to be critical. Is that somewhat readable?
I saw the statement somewhere, 3 lines down.
Yeah. Well, what it starts with is that Espresso gives you idling resources because part of your test is that you're going to try and figure out what you're waiting for something to occur in your application, and that wait could be something very custom. For this one, what happens is a login talks to service, gets an answer back, makes some logical choices. Our app figured out whether you need to accept terms of service. Maybe it says hi. It has some things it has to do, and then once it makes that choice, it then closes the activity, finishes the activity, and launches the next activity. That is a very custom situation. You're not going to write a timer to try and figure out. And so what it gives you is this idling resource that if you can describe what idle complete is to the framework, then it will wait for that situation to occur, and it has its own built-in mechanism. So you write, and this is a templated thing of a class because it's an idling resource. It'll fill in most of this template for you. The interesting part is down here, is idle now, and what I was looking for is I want to wait for this activity to be finishing at the right SDK, because you don't get that for all the versions we run on, or is destroyed. I just reverted back to, because is destroyed is a new API, I think. Is finishing is all you get prior. Yeah. We go one version back that starts with before is destroyed is allowed. So you can do that custom feature that is very Android specific and even version specific to define when your idling is complete. And that was a very interesting matcher. The other matcher was figuring out page numbers because that was a specialized controller. And here's my login activity test. We can talk about pieces of that. But down here is another matcher. And all this is doing is saying, with one of my classes, the view pager, which is custom to the application again, that was the video pager that had videos playing in the background plus text, and because they actually, when you move it, the text moves at a different rate than the video, it becomes a custom thing. But to know what page it's on becomes, you just go to here, you know you pass it in, you can do your cast into the class it's supposed to be, and this says, hey, for my custom thing, this is how I match. So I now can use the Espresso syntax for matching to say is matched, and, or is page 0, or is anything, is my thing, and as long as you describe the function, it'll match it within your application classes. It'll come back true, false, and you'll be able to verify that that situation is happening. So this would also play into if you have a sound you want to have, and then you know the object that's playing the sound. You can go right to that object, check the property in one of these custom matchers. And then the syntax we're looking at for, I have 2 tests. Here is the swipe test that I put in, and has a very simple syntax. We get into, once you've done the complexity of matchers, once you define the logic complexity, you then can go in and say, well, for this one, this is just, I want to make sure that when this activity launches and the video player is playing, I'm going to say arm view, and what I want to match, I want to make sure there's a login button, a sign up button, and that if I swipe right, over here to my custom matcher, matches page 0, 1, 2, 3. If I swipe again, it stays in page 3, and then I start swiping left to make sure I can edge bounce. So this would be something that would leverage pretty much any of your UI interaction testing that you really want to say, well, if they swipe this way, that way, up, down, and it gives you those. You can also, within Espresso framework, and you'll see they cover, there's more examples of this online, about simple interactions of, if they click a button and something else shows up, you can just say on click, and then the next statement on view, and you specify an ID of the view, and it will wait a certain amount of time for that view to show up. So you don't really have to do any custom timers for that. For the most situations, when you get elongated times to match, you probably have to do your own idling resource to know when you want to come back. The other test is the verify login, and this one just performs some simple interactions of click on the field, log in, do all those things. The complexity of this is that when it runs on a physical device for the actual application, it wants to integrate with the Google credential authenticator, which is its own dialog and its own application. That one, once you're trying to cross application boundaries, you can't write an instrumentation on one and test something else. So you take advantage of the fact that you're running within your own application and work through your own settings to say, I know that if I disconnect from at startup, if I go through and there's a Google API client, and the Google API client disconnected, where are you? As part of the, so right here, as part of the test setup, I can go through and turn that off, disconnect it, knowing that when I tap on the login box, it won't launch it because it's not connected. and that's part of the logic within the application. So kind of using my own understanding of what my application does, I can work around not crossing application boundaries with my test. And the other thing you can set up, you can do within your test setup, you can do anything you really want to get that activity going. For what I've done here is that I want to make sure when you're testing the debug application, we have an environment selector. A lot of people probably in their apps, if they have multiple environments, a lot of environment selector that's only available to the debug, but now you're trying to run your tests on that, and you'd use your internal mechanisms of picking that environment. So for us, it's save API point. I'm just forcing it to be a particular environment that I want, and make sure that I'm logged out. So I'm going to do a login test, and that's the logout function. I can set all that up within the activity or before the activity launches, and then the activity will launch within my application and run as it would otherwise. So you have some tweaks there. And then for the final piece, I'm going to show you, and for connecting Android tests, because it's Gradle, you just go into your Jenkins project or whatever's running your CI environment, and as you're running your Gradle scripts, you can say connect an Android test, and if that Jenkins slave or master has USB connecting devices, it'll run on all devices, all flavors. So you really get a way of robustly exercising your app in a way that you know give a higher level of assurance it's ready for deployment. And that was pretty much it. Since this is a large application, it has 2 Android libraries as part of the project, a main project, and then of course it builds in a bunch of other resources. It pulls in a lot of other resources for Maven. It became a multi-dex application. You're familiar with that? Once it's a multi-dex application, Espresso has a little bit of trouble with it because it tries to put the same instrumentation class in both your instrumentation runner and the application itself, which causes a class conflict. And so, the other thing I want to show you is the one aspect that there was a very hard to find piece of Gradle instruction that put at the end. Those are all of our version updates. So we do quite a bit in Gradle to get things ready for deployment. We have about 8 build flavors. There. Android test, multi-dex. Right. This is just the workaround because the multi-dex bug with Gradle is that if I have an Android test that I'm running, that means it's going to try and build both instrumentations. It just switches out for one of them, the multi-dex, and it puts in a different mock library instead. And this causes it to not have a class conflict, and all the tests run, everyone's happy. It has the instrumentation it needs. I mean, that line was the hardest one to find. Everything else worked out great. That and then the custom matchers. So that was my small piece of presentation.
What's your company strategy as far as like doing just like vertical versus the horizontal when they're holding their phone? What's your
So
solution?
far, the strategy is to this way.
Okay,
It locks
just make them
to lock the
okay.
resource. As we're moving into much more of a tablet situation, I think the rotation is going to be much more
because video
critical.
looks much better horizontally.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Yes, but social networks are now showing that more and more people are taking video this way as well.
Okay, so you're okay.
And so that's
Because you basically have to double your resources when you do count for both.
Somewhat, yeah. No, I mean, I was working at MGO before, and we did a lot of rotation, and dealing with all the rotation issues on multiple devices. And yes, it's a higher level of complexity, and some more conditional code come in for that. Again, you could, in terms of, I've not seen within the Espresso framework the rotation, but because you have full control over the experience, you could set up the activity and then inject the events that would say, hey, you're rotated, and it would then leverage those additional or those different views and layouts,
Yeah.
right? Also, since it does run just as well on virtual devices as well, that'd be another strategy to have virtual devices that are rotated
It's like
for
I'm
you.
just looking at the way you have it set up. You know how you have like the video here and all this stuff like underneath.
Mm-hmm.
It will look kind of crummy with on landscape.
It would be a
It would
different
push.
design.
Yeah, you'd
I
have
would
to put
push
it on
the
the right.
design team to come up with
You'd have to
something
do it. Okay.
something completely different, right? On rotation, it would be whatever matches
Exactly.
that,
Like if it's
especially
horizontal,
because
it's to the right, if it's on the to the bottom,
Yes.
let's say.
and to keep tablets from looking like a giant phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. All those things are very, very critical and take a whole nother cut at the material design of that layout. It should be approached as a separate
So somebody should just
set
pass
of
a law.
screens.
Somebody should pass a law where you can only write a square device.
That's right. We're changing all devices to square devices. Any other questions?
You mentioned for your Jenkins CI setup,
Mhm.
it's an actual device.
Yes.
Run test, so say if your Jenkins server is like remote.
It becomes
run
one,
operation
if you get make sure that the Jenkins remote server is a big enough machine,
Okay.
and then there's a lot of plugins for Jenkins that allow you to do Android virtual devices and spec them out, and it will spin up those devices and run on them. Some of the complexities are making sure that the device has started. There's a lot of Stack Overflow and comments around how to verify the virtual device has actually started before the test starts, because that's the biggest problem, is that it doesn't sync up right unless you have, and there's a couple additional, because the default behavior is too soon, and so there's an additional script you could write that you could put into Jenkins to run to say, all right, I'm going to launch the device, and I'm going to run this script, and this script will verify that the device is running, because it actually has to go through ADB shell and check that the animation, startup animation is completed. And there's a specific ADB shell call you can make that says, has the animation stopped, as opposed to has the device started. There's two properties you can query through ADB shell, and by default, a lot of the test runners only check for device up, and not technically, it's not ready yet.
The same question on the Jenkins. Are you using the emulator plugin on Jenkins?
Which one?
Are you using the emulator plugin? Android emulator?
I have played with the emulator plugin, but it has right now a defect against it, and I haven't seen them accept the merge request that fixes it. So it becomes, there's the Jenkins plugin, but it has a known defect that it now no longer waits the appropriate amount of time for the device to start up. And so I took it as far as I could, and then went to physical devices, because that was what was really wanted. We have a QA team that tries their best to test the application as best as they can, but they're certainly not as repeatable and reliable as, you know, the automated tests as written by the, you know, engineering team. It's very simple syntax, so for the majority of tests, QA team could easily write those tests as well.
So you have real devices connected.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
your-
and then we take, because that's where you really want to, we have a support range of devices that's very wide, and making sure that you have a good sampling of the physical devices just shortcuts what to focus on, right? Because you really want to get that high level assurance that for the most part the app is still stable and runs on all devices, because as OSs get updated, you have quirky phones. Samsung has a little tiny phone, they've got a bigger phone, and they're just not right. Espresso also has tests around testing for overlap and wrap text. And so you could fail tests if text is wrapped or if something is overlaid on something else. And I did discover that we had an instance where those login buttons were they got pushed under the support link, and that failed the test because it's doing a gesture tap, and because the support was on top, it was clicking the support link instead of the buttons. So you do really some really great discovery that way, and it really also illustrated that if anything slips into your engineering, it's kind of shaky. We had some settings on the video pager and the adapter where the adapter count would be off from the number of pages that are on the page, that are in the pager itself, which will cause a crash. But for the most part, when you just run the app, it would never hit that situation because of timing and just how slow things could be, or for whatever reason it was. When I put it under test, it would fail all the time, every time. And it really revealed, oh, go in there and fix that, or you're not going to get a tester on. So it does push you into fixing a lot of issues, just like a unit test would as well. Get you to fix those issues that you might not just see by running the app and looking at it.
Have you guys played with other frameworks like Rebodium or Appium?
Done a little bit with Appium, didn't get very far with it. It's more of a really outside in, and for some of the testing and getting to the spot you want to test, it becomes kind of more challenging to use like an Appium to get there. And then Rebodium, I guess you use Roboelectric.
We use Roboelectric. We've also used Appium previously, but we moved away from that to use Espresso because, like
Right.
you said, it's we were writing some Python scripts and stuff, and
Yeah, it just gets ugly really fast.
It was ugly. Espresso, definitely, we use
Yeah.
that at Victorious as well with UI Automator tests as well.
Right, and same with Google. That's what their choice was as well, to test all their apps. I think they're doing most of the enhancement support of that, right?
Yeah.
And then I think we had some Rebodium tests early on. I don't think it gives you the ease that Espresso does of expression and integration, because Espresso is what Google is trying to use. It's always going to be compatible with Android Studio and the Android environment, and it has a much simpler integration. I know I went through multiple rounds of trying to get Rebodium integrated within Android Studio, and I've always had difficulty with it, and the lists on what to do about doing it is like lengthy.
I haven't used Rebodium.
Alright. But yeah, with Rebodium it's always, well, it's kind of this, and maybe with this version of Studio you'll have to add these Gradle hacks, and it just becomes more problem than it's worth. Where this was truly, for the most projects, it would just be the 2 Gradle entries, 2 Gradle libraries, or 3 for Espresso, and it's good. It's solid. That would be, you're done, you're ready to write tests. And it has the instrumentation, the runners already there, plus the Gradle tasks already defined for you. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Yeah, did you try using any cloud services, like cloud CI or?
This would go straight to the cloud services of, I think, obviously Google's Device Farm would run it. AWS supports Espresso in their farm.
Did you try that? Or actually, my question was, why did you prefer to not use those services?
The fees per device minute really was the most cost inhibitive thing, because it's pretty intensive for the most part. If they're going for a device minute and you want to test, well, because your desire then would be, I want you to use all 200 devices you've got, you know, and I'm going to write tests for that. So it becomes, it's something to have as an option and go to, and it should deploy just fine, but we didn't actually go through and try it yet.
Maintaining a continuous integration and maintaining Jenkins and devices, making sure that they're always ready, and that also has a cost.
Somewhat. I mean, the devices, there's a couple of eases that you can put into the device itself. There's a couple settings you can pick that will keep the devices pretty much ready. I would think you're gonna end up with terrible screen burn-in, but the device test doesn't care. Because you just basically say that while connected USB, you stay on, and you make sure, the other caveat was that I didn't know, is that if you're using Ubuntu to run your Jenkins, you have to have the phone set on camera. It can't be any other mode, or it disconnects ADB when you run your test. I don't know why. It's just, oh, you pick camera. I'm like, why? Even on Samsung 6, anything, if it's not set to camera, ADB will disconnect after 2-3 minutes.
So how many physical devices did you say you had?
We plug in like, I think we have 10.
10, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a huge.
Yeah.
But
And are you buying
USB
new, or is it like someone's
it's
old phone?
Old phones.
Yeah.
it's just
So you
all-
could easily do a comparison of the pricing to, use an online service versus the physical, and if you're getting the devices cheaply, then yeah, I'd say at least up front it's gonna be the lower cost option.
Well, if you already have a QA department
Yeah.
and they have a set of devices
Yeah.
that they poke on to do it, I don't see much device difference of saying, well, can we just plug those into this machine for a while? You can take them away later. Doesn't matter. Because you're not going to run it on every check-in, but
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. So the CI isn't actually running on a regular basis?
CI would run on a regular basis and do your unit tests and other reliability. But when it comes down to pre-release, you're getting close to a release build, then you run it through the more rigorous functional tests. Or nightly, right? You can do it nightly and maybe and should be able to do all your tests in that time basis. But you might be doing 20, 30 check-ins or less. I don't know. There's some number of check-ins, and you really want to run CI on every check-in so you're notified as soon as possible when the build breaks. And that's where high-speed unit tests are key, critical to your regular CI.